Hey folks, welcome to Do It Yourself with Dennis. Today I'm going to show you how to change the oil in a 2004 Jeep Liberty. This is the same process for a 2003 to a 2007 Jeep Liberty. So if you've got one of those year models, you can watch this video and do the same. So let's get started. What you're going to need for this job is you're going to need 5 full quarts of oil. You're going to need an oil filter. This car, for a Fram filter, calls for for the extra guard, it's a PH 3600. They've got Fram's got different grades of filters. They've got a tough guard and a standard duty and all that. 3600 is the number you need to go by. Or you can cross-reference that to the filter of your choice. You're going to need a half-inch wrench or a ratchet with a half-inch socket. And you may or may not need an oil filter wrench. I generally don't use one because of the way the filter is on this car. You can get it off by hand. But if you need a little more torque, then you're going to need an oil filter wrench. The oil filter wrench has to be able to fit a small diameter filter. If you've got like one of the band types, they make those in different sizes. Some of the band types have the larger OD for the larger filters, the full-size filters. And then some of them will fit these smaller filters. So you got to make sure whatever filter wrench you're using, it'll fit the filter you've got. You're also going to need a oil drain pan. You don't have to have a creeper, but it's helpful. And you don't have to have ramps, but it's helpful. You can jack the front of the car up, or if you're small, you can just scooch up under it and do everything from underneath without lifting the car at all. Just make sure you've got the emergency brake on. Now, as you can see, I've pulled mine up on the ramps. I've got a set of these Rhino ramps, which are awesome ramps, by the way, if you're looking for a set. Once you're on the ramps, do a couple of things. First, set the emergency brake. The emergency brake is a mechanical brake to the rear wheels, and it'll keep the car from rolling. Then you can also chock the tires if you want. From the steering wheel down to the kick panel, which is where your left foot goes, right here is the hood release. So you pop the hood release, you just pull that lever back. That releases the hood. There's a hood latch right here, right under the J, that you push it over to the right. That'll let you lift the hood the rest of the way up. Now, there's a couple of things under the hood that you're going to need to be familiar with. This is the dipstick. That's where you're going to check your oil. And then you've got your filler cap right here. Now, I don't know about all of them, but I know on mine, this filler cap is super tight. Like I almost can't get it with my hand. I'll just do it like this. I'll take an oil rag, put it over there so I don't scratch the cap up. Take a pair of channel locks and open them up to a big setting like so, and get a hold of that cap like so, and then just break it loose if you can't do it by hand. And then that way you can take that off. There you go. That's where you put your oil in later on. Alright, so next we got to go under the Jeep. I've got my drain pan already stuck under there, and got my emergency brake on, and got my creeper. You don't really have to have a creeper, but it's a little easier if you do. And then I've got my half-inch wrench. So here's that's the drain plug from the oil pan. You got that cross member, you've got like the catalytic converter, the transmission, so you can kind of locate it. And that's a drain plug, so that's where we're going to drain the oil from. I line my oil drain pan lengthwise, because when the oil comes out of here, it's going to come out on an arc. So I make sure I've got one end of the drain pan under the oil pan plug, and then one end further up here. So when you go to loosen your oil plug, you're going to turn counterclockwise as you look at the head of the bolt to loosen it. So it's always lefty loosey, righty tighty. Now, depending on who put the drain plug in the last time, most people over torque it, so it's really hard to get loose. So a lot of folks may not be able to do it with just a wrench. They may have to have a longer handled ratchet or a longer handled wrench to break it loose. But sometimes they're pretty tight. The other thing I would advise is to not try to do this when the car's hot, because you're working around like the exhaust system and things like that, and it's really hot. So if you touch something, you're going to get burnt. It's better if the engine oil is a little bit warm, if it's run for just a little bit, and then maybe let the exhaust cool off. You don't want it to be stone cold, because the oil drains better if it's not stone cold, but you also don't want to work on it when it's scalding hot. So once you get that drain plug loose, make sure you got your pan lined up right, and then I always kind of push into the plug to keep the threads interlocked so that it doesn't drain a whole lot, because I don't really like getting a handful of oil. So I'll just kind of push into it as I get it unscrewed, and then when I feel the threads kind of getting disengaged, then I just move it out of the way real quick, like so. So I don't get a handful of oil, just less I got to clean up. Then I keep my rag handy so that I can wipe that off. Wipe whatever oil I got on my hands off. Now you don't have to get every last drop out. Once it gets down to a real kind of like a hair thin stream, that's as much as you're going to get out. You can sit here and let it drip if you want, if you're just kind of OCD about things, but that's fine. The other thing you want to do when you take this plug out, and the reason you want to wipe it off, is you want to inspect this washer that's on there. There's a rubber washer that's kind of built into the drain plug, and you want to make sure it doesn't have any nicks, or it's not pulling away from the bolt head, anything like that, because if it is, it's probably going to let your oil leak, and you may need to replace it. This one looks fine, so I'm good to go. Normally you don't have to do that. You just want to check it every so often to make sure. And then the same thing, I'll kind of come in from the top and put the plug back in so that I don't get a fistful of oil. And I'll kind of hand thread it up, get it finger tight, wipe off my oil. I don't like to leave a lot of oil on everything, because oil left on surfaces just gathers dirt, which makes for sludge, and that holds water, which makes for rust. So anyway, and then you want to tighten it back up. Again, you don't have to like crank on it, you just want it to be tight. I don't know what the torque spec is on this. I'm sure there is one, but it's not like, you know, crank down tight. You just want it to be, you don't want it to vibrate loose. I might even look up the torque spec and post it, but anyway, make sure it's good and tight, and then you're fine. And then we can scoot up front and get the oil filter out. Now you can get to the oil filter a couple of different ways. You can come up underneath the front end and get it right here. If you can see that, yeah, right there. Right there. So you can come up behind the air dam and in front of the sway bar, and you can reach it. To me, that's not a real comfortable place to grab it. I actually would rather do it from up top. But what you do need to know about underneath is this. If you're looking the front end here, there's a harmonic balancer. That's the center of the engine. right behind the cross member, right there, is a chute. And what that chute is that's where the oil that's going to come out of the oil filter drains into a pan, and then it comes out of this chute, and that's where you want to have your oil pan under, is right under there, because it's going to drain down as that oil filter drains the oil out. Normally I will put my oil pan, my drain pan, underneath this chute, and then I'll go up from the top and reach over and undo my oil filter. I'm tall, I'm 6 foot tall, so when the Jeep is on ramps, I can still reach the oil filter from up top. If you're shorter, you might need a stool or something like that to do that with, or you might just want to get it from the bottom. Also, I normally don't use an oil filter wrench, I just wrench it off with my hands, so this might be a little different than how you have to do it. But so, in order to show you how the oil drains and stuff, I'm going to go ahead and pull the filter off from underneath this time, and hopefully I can film it. So I'm going to turn my drain pan crossways this time, and I'm going to get it underneath this chute so that it's going to drain into the pan like so. I just don't know how successful I'm going to be at showing you this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach up in here and I'm going to get a hold of this oil filter, and I'm going to turn it loose like so. I'm hoping you can see that. I can't watch it and hold the camera and see the camera at the same time, so hopefully you can see that. And then you'll see that as I loosen it, it's going to start draining oil out of the chute. So what I'll normally do is crack that thing open, let it drain a little bit until I'm down to like a drip or something, and then I got a much better chance of getting that filter loose and taking it off without spilling oil all over the place. Because you got to realize this filter is going to be full of oil because it slopes down. Some of them don't. Some of them are mounted vertically. Some of the Toyotas I know mount the filter vertically so that when you drain the engine oil out, it drains the filter too, which is really kind of nice. But on most cars they don't. They're either up at an incline or vertically toward the top, which makes them hold a lot of oil. So, which is also why I wear gloves. And also keep an oil rag handy anytime you're doing an oil change, because you're going to need it. Alright, so we're down to a drip. So I'm going to try to get back up in here and do this without making a disastrous mess. As you take the filter off, like I say, it's going to be full of oil, so when you get it threaded off, you're going to have oil on your hands and oil on the filter, so it's going to be slick, and don't drop it. And see, it's going to drain a bunch more oil out when it comes off. And then also try to turn your filter upright like you got a glass of water or something, and then try your best to not drop it. I'm going to have to set the camera down so I can get it with my other hand, otherwise I'm going to drop it. I got my filter out. I apologize for not being able to show you the whole thing. You can see right, if I can get it in the camera, you can see where the filter was, that silver ring right in that flange right in the middle of the screen. That's what the filter threads onto. And the ring part is where the rubber seal seats up to, and then the threaded part goes in the middle of the filter. So you know, if you when you get that out, if you drop it, if you make a mess, whatever, just take a couple of oil rags or paper towels or whatever and wipe it up the best you can, and it'll be fine. It happens to everybody. So, and then and the chute stops dripping because most of that oil is out. Now that's one of the things that I don't like about these little catch pans, is unless you get up in there and wipe that out after you've drained the filter, once you're done with your oil change, that thing will sit there on your driveway or in your garage and it'll drip several drips, making you think you've got a leak. And it's just the excess oil draining out of that chute. So sometimes I'll take a shop paper towel and wipe that chute out when I'm done so that it doesn't do that. Alright, so now what you do next is you take your new filter and you want to put just a little bit of oil around this seal. You can see there's a rubber seal all the way around it, and then that's the threaded part that goes up onto that stud in the middle of the flange where I showed you a minute ago. You want a little bit of oil on this rubber seal because it helps it to seal up against that machine metal surface and not leak oil. I use the old oil because you're going to have some people that come on and say you should only use clean oil for that. It really doesn't matter. This oil is not going to get into your engine. I guarantee you there's more residual oil left in the engine than you're going to put on this seal. So it makes no difference whatsoever, because all you're doing is you're taking just to dip the tip of your finger into the oil, your old oil like this, and then take that seal, and all you're doing is putting a little bit around there like that. Just make sure you've got it all the way around there. That's all you got to have, just enough to lubricate that rubber seal a little bit. Now be careful when you set your filter down. You know, don't obviously don't set it face down, because then you're going to pick up grit. Be careful when you go back up underneath the car to put the filter on, not to bump that seal on anything that's gritty or grimy. Just go in there nice and easy, don't bump that on anything, and then you're just going to screw it on. It's ideal if you can see it when you're screwing it on. What you're going to do is you're going to spin that on until the seal contacts the metal flange. You can either feel it or you can watch it. It's easier if you can do both, actually. Once that seal has made contact to the metal flange that you're screwing it onto, not the threaded part, but this part, once that outside part touches, then you want to go a half a turn further than that, and that's as tight as you need that to be. A lot of people grossly over torque these filters. It makes them really hard to get off, and it's not necessary, because this rubber seal will keep it from leaking. It's not a real high pressure system, so you're not trying to make a seal against you know, super high pressure. The oil pressure in a car's engine is not that high. So anyway, like I say, you're going to put it on there, you're going to spin it on until the seal seats on that flange, and then you're going to give it another half a turn, and that's it. That's all you got to do. So I'm just going to do that up underneath. I explained it rather than show it to you because it's very difficult to film, and I don't think you can see it all that well anyway. So this Jeep, it's a 3.7 V6, so with a filter it takes exactly 5 quarts of oil. So you'll also need a funnel, just to keep from missing. Some people can do it without a funnel. I usually don't have the greatest success. So, and then most of the time I'll stick a couple of oil rags just around there, just in case I do miss, because it's a bigger mess if you got to clean it up. I'll usually give that a wipe just to get the crud off of it, and then put it back on. Next thing we're going to use actually is the dipstick. It's going to be marked engine oil. There's 2 back here. There's one back here if you got an automatic transmission. That's for your transmission fluid. That'll be a different video. We'll talk about that in a later one. And then you've got this one that's further forward. That's marked engine oil. That's what you're going to check your oil with. What you want to do, now that we're done filling the engine with oil, we've made sure that the drain plug is in underneath. We've made sure that the oil filter is on and snug. what we're going to do is we're going to start the engine. If you have an oil pressure gauge, we're going to make sure that that needle comes up to where it normally does on the gauge. That tells you that your oil pressure's up. And then while it's running, we're going to look underneath and make sure that there are no drips. If you're going to get a leak, it's going to happen when the engine's running. And the two places that it's going to drip is from your oil filter or your drain plug. So you want to make sure that neither one of those spots are leaking. If they're going to leak, they're going to leak pretty quick. So you don't have to let it run but just a couple of minutes to be sure that you've got no leak. If you see oil dripping, immediately cut the engine off and then go address the leak. Either tighten up the oil filter or tighten up the drain plug. Alright, so no leaks. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take your dipstick all the way out. I usually hold the end of it with a rag because there's going to be oil on the end and you don't want to fling it everywhere, so I usually pull it out like that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put the dipstick back into the tube. Let's see if I can show this to you. You have to put it in all the way till you see there's a little O-ring here, and you want that O-ring to seal, and you want this flange right here to be all the way up against the top of the metal tube that's on the engine. That tells you it's all the way in there. And that's important because this thing is calibrated to go just far enough into the oil pan to read whether or not you've got enough oil. I'm going to try to show this to you. You'll see on here there's a scale that will tell you if it's below here, below that hatched area, to add. If it's within the hatched area, it's fine. So ideally when you're done changing the oil is going to be up here very close to the top of the hatched area. It doesn't have to be exactly on it, but you want it pretty close. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick the dipstick in and then pull it back out and look and see where the oil, how far up the oil comes on this dipstick to tell us, make sure that we've got enough oil in the engine. So you're going to make sure it's all the way seated and then pull it out. And as you can see, we're right to the top of the hatched area. So that's exactly where we want to be. The other reason that you don't check the oil before you start the engine is because the oil has to circulate to fill up the oil filter. If you've checked the oil before you crank the engine, the oil filter is going to be empty, so your dipstick is going to read high. You're going to think you've got too much oil in there. Once you crank the engine, the oil pressure comes up, it's going to fill up the filter. When you turn it off, you give it give the oil a minute to drain back down into the pan, and then you check your oil level with your dipstick. One other thing that I do is I go to my local parts store, and they've got oil change reminder stickers that are free. Well, they're not really stickers. What they are is they're just little vinyl peel-offs, and you can write your next service date and your mileage. It's just a little sheet of vinyl, and you can stick it to the inside of your windshield. Alright folks, so that's it. A couple of cleanup items that I do is, like I mentioned earlier, I take my oil drain pan and I pour my used oil into the jug that I just used for the oil change. I mark it used oil, and then I take that to my local parts store and they'll recycle that oil. I take my oil filter and I drain that well into my drain pan, so I can just box it up in the box that the new filter came in and put it in the garbage. That's it. Thanks for watching my video, and if you would, give me a like, subscribe to my channel, and hopefully I'll have other videos that can help you out with your car and home maintenance needs. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back soon.